Montana Territory, 1873. A low winter sun slanted through the frost-etched windows of the cabin as Asher Branigan stood at his wife's grave. Snow crunched beneath his boots, the sound lonely as a wolf's howl in the vast emptiness of the Montana rangeland. 3 small figures huddled beside him. His children, now motherless after the fever had taken Caroline just 2 weeks prior. "Pa, I'm cold," 6-year-old Mary whispered, tugging at his hand. Asher looked down at his daughter, her face so like her mother's it made his chest ache. 4-year-old Thomas and 2-year-old Emma stood silent beside her, too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the hollow absence in their lives. "Let's go home," he said, his voice rough as unsanded wood. At 26, Asher had already mapped his life's boundaries, raised the children, worked the small cattle ranch he'd built with his own 2 hands, and never again let another person close enough to leave him shattered when they left. The frontier was merciless that way. It gave with one hand and took with the other, and a man who didn't protect his heart was a man who wouldn't survive. Back at the cabin, Asher faced the brutal truth of his situation. The children needed care he couldn't provide while also working the ranch. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and winter was setting in hard. His neighbor, old Jim Hawkins, had offered to take the children until spring, but Asher couldn't bear the thought. They were all he had left of Caroline. "What are we going to eat, Pa?" Thomas asked, his small face pinched with hunger. Asher stared at the cold hearth. Caroline had been the one who made this cabin a home. Without her, he felt as lost as a greenhorn in a blizzard. "We'll manage," he said, though the words rang hollow even to his own ears. The next morning, as if answering an unspoken prayer, a wagon approached the cabin. Asher stepped onto the porch, Winchester in hand, squinting against the glare of sun on snow. The wagon stopped, and a young woman climbed down, her blue woolen dress and dark cloak stark against the white landscape. "Mr. Branigan," she called, her breath clouding in the cold air. "I'm Ruby Jenkins. Mrs. Hawkins sent me. I've come about the cook position." Asher frowned. He'd mentioned to Jim that he needed help, but hadn't expected this. A slip of a girl, couldn't be more than 22, with eyes the color of summer grass and honey blonde hair peeking from beneath her bonnet. "There's been a mistake," he said stiffly. "I can't afford to hire help." Ruby Jenkins straightened, adjusting her worn leather gloves. "I don't require payment beyond room and board, Mr. Branigan. I need a place to stay for the winter, and you need someone to care for your children and keep house." Mrs. Hawkins said it would be a fair arrangement. Before Asher could refuse again, Emma toddled onto the porch and stood staring at the visitor with solemn eyes. Then Mary and Thomas appeared, their faces lighting up at the sight of a new person. "Are you going to be our new mama?" Mary asked innocently. Asher felt his face burn. "No, she is not. Go back inside, all of you." Ruby's cheeks colored, but she didn't flinch. "I'm just here to cook and help with the children, little one. Nothing more." That evening, after Ruby had prepared the first hot meal the cabin had seen in days and tucked the children into bed with a story that had them giggling for the first time since Caroline's death, Asher sat at the kitchen table watching her clean up. "I'll be clear, Miss Jenkins. This is temporary. Once spring comes, you'll move on." Ruby paused in her work, a dishcloth in her slender hands. "Of course, Mr. Branigan. I understand completely." What Asher didn't understand was the odd feeling in his chest, like someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed up too long. "Why are you really here?" he asked suddenly. Young women don't typically seek out positions on isolated ranches with widowers. Ruby turned to face him, chin lifted. "I was engaged to be married. He decided another woman suited him better. The gossip in town became difficult. Mrs. Hawkins is my mother's cousin. She offered to help me find a situation away from prying eyes until the talk dies down." The honesty surprised him. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be," she said, turning back to her work. "He did me a favor. I've learned that putting your trust in others only leads to disappointment." Asher nodded, recognizing his own philosophy in her words. "On that, Miss Jenkins, we agree." The days stretched into weeks as winter tightened its grip on the Montana rangeland. Ruby proved herself indispensable, not just with the children, but around the ranch. She could milk a cow, mend clothes, and even helped Asher pull a calf during a difficult birth when none of his ranch hands were available. One night in late January, as a blizzard howled around the cabin, Asher returned from checking the livestock to find Ruby sitting by the fire, darning socks with Emma asleep in her lap. "The other two?" he asked quietly, stamping snow from his boots. "In bed." Mary had questions about her mother. "I hope I didn't overstep, but I told her that her mama is watching over her from heaven." Asher hung his coat and sat heavily in the chair opposite her. "That's what Caroline would have said." Ruby looked up, her fingers stilling. "You never talk about her." "There's no point in dwelling on what can't be changed. The children need to remember her and be reminded of what they've lost," he countered. Ruby gently shifted Emma to the small trundle bed near the fire. "Children are stronger than you think, Mr. Branigan. They need to know it's all right to miss her, to love her still." Asher watched the firelight play across Ruby's face. She was beautiful, he realized with a jolt, in a quiet, steadfast way that snuck up on a man. "You've been good for them," he admitted grudgingly. Ruby smiled, the expression transforming her face. "They're wonderful children. You've done well with them, considering. Considering I'm just a rancher who has no idea how to raise children on his own." "Considering the circumstances," she corrected gently. "Grief is a heavy burden to carry while trying to keep a ranch running and 3 little ones fed." Something in her understanding tone cracked a small fissure in the wall Asher had built around his heart. He looked away, unsettled. "It's late. We should get some rest." As February thawed into March, Asher found himself watching Ruby more often. The way she sang while kneading bread, how she taught Mary her letters at the kitchen table, the patience with which she answered Thomas's endless questions about everything from stars to cattle. One afternoon, as Asher mended fence lines, he heard laughter from the direction of the cabin. He looked up to see Ruby and the children in the muddy yard, flying a kite made from paper and sticks. Emma toddled after them, her face alight with joy, while Mary and Thomas took turns holding the string under Ruby's guidance. For the first time in months, Asher felt something loosen in his chest. That evening at supper, when Ruby placed a steaming apple pie on the table to the children's delight, he found himself smiling. "Mr. Branigan," Ruby said later, after the children were asleep, "I found Caroline's recipe book in the pantry. I hope you don't mind that I used it for the pie." Asher stiffened. "You went through her things?" Ruby's cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry. Mary mentioned it was her favorite, and I thought it might be nice for them to have something of hers." "Those belongings are private," he said, his tone sharper than intended. "Of course." Ruby's voice was quiet. "I didn't mean to intrude. It just seemed wrong for her recipes to sit unused when they could bring joy to her children." The logic in her words deflated his anger. Wasn't that what Caroline would have wanted? For life to continue, for her children to remember the small pleasures she had created for them? "The pie was good," he conceded finally. "Caroline would have approved." Ruby's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "Thank you." The following week, a letter arrived from town. Ruby read it with a troubled expression. "Bad news?" Asher asked, surprised by his own concern. "My former fiancé has married. They're expecting a child." She folded the letter carefully. "The town believes I left because I couldn't bear to see them together. Does that bother you? What people think?" Ruby met his gaze steadily. "No. What bothers me is that I once thought love was enough. That if you cared for someone, everything else would fall into place. I was naive." Asher recognized the self-protection in her words, the same armor he'd fashioned for himself. But on Ruby, it seemed ill-fitting, like a coat too heavy for her frame. "You're young," he said. "You'll find someone else." "I'm not looking," she replied firmly. "I've learned my lesson about romance. My plan is to save enough to open a small bakery in a town where nobody knows me." The thought of Ruby leaving, of her steady presence and warm smile belonging to some other community, left Asher with an unexpected hollow feeling. In early April, as the mountains shed their snow and the first wildflowers appeared in the meadows, Thomas fell ill with a high fever. Ruby stayed up 3 nights straight, bathing his forehead with cool cloths and spooning broth between his cracked lips while Asher watched, terror gripping his heart. The memory of Caroline's death was too fresh, too raw. On the 3rd night, when Thomas's fever finally broke, Asher found Ruby slumped in the chair beside the boy's bed, exhausted. Without thinking, he lifted her in his arms and carried her to her own bed. As he laid her down, her eyes fluttered open. "Is Thomas?" "He's better. Thanks to you." Her lips curved in a tired smile. I promised them, you know. The first night I was here, I promised I wouldn't let anything happen to them. Something shifted in Asher's chest, a recognition that this woman had given his children what he couldn't in his grief, a promise of safety, of continuance. Thank you, he whispered, voice rough with emotion, for keeping that promise. The following Sunday, Asher surprised everyone by announcing they would attend church in town. It was the first time since Caroline's funeral that he'd considered such an outing. As they drove the wagon toward town, with Ruby beside him and the children freshly scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best, Asher was struck by how much like a family they appeared. The thought was both comforting and alarming. In town, Ruby's presence beside the Branigan family caused a stir of whispers. Asher found himself strangely protective, steering her away from curious onlookers with a hand at the small of her back. After the service, as they walked toward the general store, a well-dressed couple approached. The woman's eyes were fixed on Ruby with undisguised malice. Why, Ruby Jenkins? I'd heard you'd run off to lick your wounds, but I never imagined you'd sink to playing nursemaid on some remote ranch. Ruby paled but held her ground. Hello, Elizabeth. Daniel. I trust you're both well. The man, Daniel, had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Elizabeth's smile was vicious. Quite well. We're expecting our first child in August. And you? Found someone desperate enough to take Edward's leavings. Before Ruby could respond, Asher stepped forward. Miss Jenkins is employed by me to care for my children, and she does so with more grace and dignity than you're displaying right now, ma'am. Elizabeth's eyes widened, then narrowed. Well, I see you found a protector. How convenient. That's enough, Asher said firmly. Come on, Ruby. Children. As they walked away, Ruby's face burned with humiliation. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Asher shook his head. I'm the one who's sorry. No wonder you wanted to leave town. She was my friend once, Ruby said quietly. Before Daniel decided he preferred her to me. Edward was Daniel's brother. He courted me to keep me distracted while Daniel pursued Elizabeth. The cruelty of it struck Asher like a physical blow. You're better off without such people in your life. Ruby looked up at him, her green eyes filled with a vulnerability that made his chest ache. Yes, I believe I am. That night, after they returned to the ranch and the children were asleep, Asher found Ruby on the porch, gazing at the stars. Thank you, she said without turning, for defending me today. Asher moved to stand beside her, close enough to smell the lavender soap she used. Those people don't deserve your thoughts, Ruby. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it felt right on his tongue, natural as breathing. Sometimes I wonder if there's something wrong with me, she admitted, that I could be so completely fooled by someone I thought loved me. There's nothing wrong with you, Asher said firmly. Trust isn't a weakness, Ruby. It's just misplaced sometimes. Is that why you don't trust anyone? Because Caroline died. The question hit too close to a truth Asher hadn't fully acknowledged. Caroline didn't choose to leave, but she still left, and I still had to figure out how to go on without her. You don't have to do it alone, Ruby said softly. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Asher took a step back, suddenly afraid of the feelings stirring to life within him. It's getting late, he said abruptly. Good night, Miss Jenkins. The walls went back up, brick by brick. As spring blossomed into summer, the ranch thrived under their combined care. Asher expanded the vegetable garden at Ruby's suggestion, and together they built a small chicken coop that soon provided fresh eggs daily. The children flourished under Ruby's gentle guidance, their grief softening into a sweeter kind of remembrance. One hot July afternoon, as Asher returned from moving cattle to higher pastures, he heard Mary's voice rising in song from the direction of the creek. He rode toward the sound and pulled up short at the sight before him. Ruby stood knee-deep in the creek, her skirts hitched up and secured at her waist, her honey-blonde hair loose down her back. Emma sat on the bank, splashing her feet in the water while Ruby taught Mary and Thomas how to catch crawfish with their bare hands. Their laughter echoed across the water, bright as sunshine. Something caught in Asher's throat, the realization that his children were happy again, truly happy, and that this woman had given them back their joy. That evening, as Ruby served a supper of fresh trout and new potatoes, Mary piped up. Miss Ruby, will you stay with us forever? The question hung in the air like summer lightning. Asher watched Ruby's face carefully. I'm here as long as your father needs my help, she answered diplomatically. But we need you, Thomas insisted. Pa smiles now. He didn't smile before. Asher felt heat rise to his face. Thomas, that's enough. Later, after the children were in bed, Asher found Ruby mending one of his shirts on the porch. About what Thomas said, children say what they observe, Ruby interrupted gently. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Asher sat beside her, watching her nimble fingers with the needle. We've never discussed what happens when summer ends. Ruby's hand stilled. I assumed I would move on, as we agreed. And if I asked you to stay? The question surprised them both. Ruby looked up, her green eyes wide. Are you asking me to stay, Mr. Branigan? Asher, he corrected. And yes, I think I am. The children need you. Something flickered in Ruby's expression. Disappointment? I see. Well, I would need to consider it. I had plans. The bakery, Asher remembered. Of course. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. I should finish this, Ruby said finally, returning to her mending. Asher nodded and stood. Good night, Ruby. Good night, Asher. His name on her lips followed him into dreams that night. August brought the county fair, and Asher surprised everyone by insisting they all attend. Ruby entered her apple pies and strawberry preserves in the competition, winning blue ribbons for both. The children rode ponies and played games, their faces sticky with candy. As the day wore on, Asher found himself watching Ruby more than the festivities. She wore a new dress of cornflower blue that brought out the green in her eyes, and she'd pinned her honey blonde hair up with a few curls escaping around her face. When a young rancher from the next county approached her for a dance, Asher felt a surge of something that could only be jealousy. Before he could intervene, Mary tugged at his hand. Pa, why don't you dance with Miss Ruby? Don't you think she's pretty? Out of the mouths of babes. Yes, she's very pretty, he admitted. But Miss Ruby can dance with whomever she pleases. But she keeps looking at you, Mary insisted with a child's certainty. Asher glanced over to find Ruby declining the rancher's offer with a polite smile. Their eyes met across the fairground, and something unspoken passed between them. That night, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Ruby broke the comfortable silence. I've decided not to open the bakery. Asher glanced at her, surprised. Why not? She gazed up at the stars, her profile silvered by moonlight. I've realized there are different kinds of dreams, different ways to be happy. And what would make you happy, Ruby? Her eyes met his, vulnerable yet determined. A home, family, things I thought I'd lost the chance for. Asher's heart quickened. You could have those things. Could I? She asked softly. Before he could answer, Emma stirred and began to fuss. The moment slipped away, but something had changed between them. A possibility had opened, like a door left ajar. The following week brought unexpected trouble. A band of cattle rustlers hit several neighboring ranches, and Asher spent long days riding the boundaries of his property with his two ranch hands, watching for any sign of the thieves. You should take the children to town until this blows over, he told Ruby one night. It's not safe here. We're not leaving you alone, she replied firmly. This is our home too. Our home. The words warmed him even as he worried for their safety. The next day, as Asher checked the western pasture, a shot rang out. His horse reared, and pain blazed through his left shoulder. He managed to stay in the saddle and race back to the ranch, blood soaking his shirt. Ruby's face drained of color when she saw him. Children, inside now, she ordered, helping Asher from his horse. In the cabin, she cut away his shirt and examined the wound. The bullet went through. You're lucky. Her hands trembled as she cleaned and bandaged him, but her voice remained steady. The rustlers, Asher grimaced. They're closer than we thought. I've sent Thomas to get your hands from the bunkhouse, Ruby said. We'll be ready if they come here. As night fell, Asher's two ranch hands kept watch outside, while Ruby prepared the cabin for a possible siege. She moved with efficient calm, filling water buckets, checking ammunition for Asher's rifle, and comforting the children. You're good in a crisis, Asher observed from his place on the bed, where Ruby had insisted he rest. My father was a doctor, she explained. I assisted him often. You never mentioned that before. Ruby smiled faintly. There's a lot we haven't told each other, I suppose. In the tense hours that followed, as they waited for an attack that didn't come, Asher watched Ruby and realized with startling clarity that he had fallen in love with her. Not just for how she cared for his children, but for her strength, her kindness, her quiet dignity in the face of hardship. The revelation both terrified and exhilarated him. What if he lost her too? What if she didn't feel the same? The risk seemed suddenly too great. Dawn broke with news that the sheriff had captured the rustlers at the next ranch over. The danger had passed, but something had changed in Asher. The brush with death had forced him to confront what truly mattered, and what he stood to lose by holding back. As Asher recovered from his wound, Ruby's care was constant yet respectful. She never overstepped, never presumed, but her touch lingered sometimes, and her eyes held questions she wouldn't voice. One evening, as summer waned toward autumn, Asher found Ruby in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables. The setting sun turned her hair to molten gold, and he was struck again by her beauty. "Ruby," he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "There's something I need to say." She straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "Yes." The words he'd rehearsed deserted him. I think we should discuss your position here. For the future." Ruby's face fell slightly. "Oh, of course. That came out wrong," he said quickly. "What I mean is," before he could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted. Asher turned to see 3 riders approaching, the sheriff and 2 men he didn't recognize. "Branigan," the sheriff called, dismounting. "Got someone here looking for Miss Jenkins." One of the other men stepped forward, his expensive suit marking him as a city dweller. "Ruby? Is that you?" Ruby had gone pale as milk. "Edward." Asher felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Edward, the man who had jilted her. Edward Brown smiled, all charm and confidence. "I've come to take you home, Ruby. I made a terrible mistake. Elizabeth and Daniel, their marriage is already falling apart. I should have trusted my heart." Ruby stood frozen, her basket of vegetables clutched before her like a shield. "Mr. Brown here has been searching for Miss Jenkins for months," the sheriff explained. "Said there was a misunderstanding between them." "A misunderstanding?" Ruby found her voice at last. "You courted me for 2 years, proposed marriage, then abandoned me for my best friend's sister." Edward had the grace to look ashamed. "I was a fool. I've regretted it every day since. Please, Ruby, come back with me. I can give you the life you deserve, the bakery you always wanted, a home in town, respectability." Asher watched, heart in his throat, as Ruby seemed to consider the offer. Everything Edward offered was what she'd once wanted, what she'd dreamed of before coming to the ranch. "Mr. Branigan," the sheriff said quietly, "this seems like a private matter. We'll wait by the road." As the men withdrew, Asher found himself unable to look at Ruby. "You should go with him," he said stiffly. "If that's what you want." "Is that what you think I want?" Ruby asked, her voice strangely calm. "It's what you came here to escape from," Asher replied. "The gossip, the pain. Now you can go back with your head held high. He's offering you everything you planned for. Everything I planned for before I met you. Before I met Mary and Thomas and Emma." Ruby set down her basket and stepped closer. "Asher, look at me." He forced himself to meet her gaze, terrified of what he might see there. "Ask me to stay," she whispered. "Not for the children. For you." The walls Asher had built around his heart crumbled in an instant. "Stay," he said hoarsely. "Stay because I love you, Ruby Jenkins. Because the thought of you leaving feels like having my heart torn out all over again." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "All these months, I've been falling in love with you, with your children, with this life we've built. I didn't want to hope." Asher reached for her, his good arm pulling her close. "I've been afraid," he confessed. "Afraid to love again, afraid to lose again. But I'm more afraid of never knowing what we could have been." "Then ask me properly," Ruby said, her eyes shining. Asher knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "Ruby Jenkins, will you marry me? Will you be a mother to my children and a partner in all things? Will you build a life with me on this ranch?" "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." When Edward approached again, he found them standing hand in hand. "I'm staying here," Ruby told him without preamble. "I've found where I belong." Edward's face hardened. "With a wounded rancher and someone else's children? This isn't the Ruby I knew." "You never really knew me," Ruby replied. "But Asher does." After Edward and the sheriff departed, Asher and Ruby gathered the children to share their news. Mary clapped her hands in delight, Thomas hooped, and little Emma asked solemnly, "Can I call you Mama now?" Ruby knelt to embrace her. "I would be honored, sweet girl." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with the children as their attendants and the whole community in attendance. Ruby wore a gown of ivory silk with sprigs of wildflowers in her hair, and Asher couldn't take his eyes off her. "I never thought I'd find love again," he told her that night, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, their home. "I thought that part of my life was over." Ruby leaned into his embrace, her head resting against his chest. "I thought love was just a pretty lie people told themselves. But this, it's real. It's stronger because we both know what it means to lose. And what it means to find," Asher added, tilting her face up to his. In the years that followed, the Branigan ranch prospered. Ruby gave birth to twin boys the following summer, and the cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. Mary grew into a young woman with her mother's kindness and her stepmother's determination. Thomas became his father's right hand on the ranch, and Emma developed Ruby's gift for baking. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Asher took Ruby's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your bakery? Your plans?" Ruby smiled, the same smile that had first cracked the ice around his heart. "I didn't give up anything that matters. I found everything I never knew I was looking for." Asher pulled her close, marveling at how this one woman had changed everything, had taught him that the heart isn't diminished by loss but expanded by love, that vulnerability isn't weakness but the greatest strength of all. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" "For taking care of us when we were broken. For stealing my guarded heart." In the fading light, with the sounds of their children's laughter carrying on the evening breeze, Asher Branigan knew that some treasures were worth the risk of loss, and that love, true and steadfast, could tame even the wildest frontier of the human heart.